Hey guys, here we are again talking about coaching, and today it's just me and Yannick. Sevas sadly couldn't join us today.
You say that with a big smile. I know you always have a big smile on your face, but
It's a bit psychopathic, but no, I'm missing Sevas, and I wish he could be
what
here.
have you done to Sevas?
Oh, I can't tell you.
He's out there on the surfboard, low tide, just being sucked out into the ocean.
There's
Give him
big
a
waves
challenge.
today.
That man
Bless
needs a
him.
new challenge.
I think he'd love that, actually.
I think so too. Yeah.
So today I've kind of brought some more personal questions, and actually Yannick and I just recorded a really nice episode about some of the stigmas around coaching. And this feels a bit like a question that follows on from there, but maybe takes a different angle on it. And my second question today is, why is coaching important? And again, from a personal perspective, I guess it's a question I often ask myself partly because of the stigma and trying to justify why, because that's what I believe, that coaching is so useful for people. But also, I do therapy at the same time, and I find they do different things, but somewhere I still lean into coaching a lot. And I think I bring quite a coaching attitude to my therapist, which I'm not sure is always appreciated. But that's why I'd love to hear from Yannick, in particular, why do you think coaching is so important for people out there?
Oof, yeah. When I saw that question just before we got on, right, you sent me a bunch of really good questions, which I'm sure we're going to work off as this podcast continues. But it's a huge question. Why is coaching important? Because it's important on so many levels. So I guess that's something to acknowledge first, right? You mentioned coaching, you mentioned therapy. They're both not one thing. So difficult to speak about coaching from why is coaching important, right? Because I think there's questions like, why is positive psychology coaching important? Why is existential coaching important? Why is performance coaching important? Why is health coaching important? Why is nutritional coaching important? Why is behavioral coaching important? Why is somatic coaching important? Right? When we ask about importance, it feels to me like you're asking about purpose and value and impact. And each of these approaches to coaching have somewhat different impact, direction. And if I look at coaching generally, what do all coaching approaches have in common? They help people be better, figure things out, have more awareness, bring about change of some sort, insight, transcendence, a better relationship with self, happiness, psychological well-being. Not all coaching approaches do all of that. They have different nuances in terms of what they were designed to create. But for individual outcomes, there's a range of different reasons why coaching is important. So it really depends on who you're talking to. So somebody comes to you and says, well, I have a particular kind of problem. Coaching can help you solve a problem. Somebody comes to you and says, I have a particular kind of desire. Coaching can help you figure out how to get closer to having that desire fulfilled. So I think it's always in relation to what somebody wants to create or what somebody wants to move away from, like a pain or a challenge or a difficult situation. So for the individual, there's a bunch of different reasons why coaching is important. But if we look beyond the individual, there's the impact that coaching has on groups of people, on families, on workplaces, on society, on the world in general. When you work with somebody, when somebody works with a coach, they tend to become more self-aware and more aware of their relationship with others, their impact in their communities, depending what kind of coach you work with, right? But I think a good coach will help you communicate your needs better to yourself and to other people. Be perhaps a bit more transparent or show up a bit more vulnerable, get less triggered by trauma or by difficult experiences you've had in the past, figure out behavior patterns that might be not very helpful in the situations that you're in. So I think through coaching, people become more better rounded people. They're going to show up in relationships better. That has knock-on effects on various stakeholders. Who's affected by your relationship? Imagine how much your kids are being affected when a couple communicates better, shares their needs, shows up vulnerable, able to say things that they weren't able to say before, able to receive things and hear things that before would have caused them to be very defensive. And now they have an open mind and they can sort things out. The impact on children is profound. The impact on a manager is profound when somebody figures out how to communicate what they're good at and what their strengths are and what they need and what went wrong and be more assertive. Whole companies innovate, like teams work together better. It's not just the parents that work together better, so the kids benefit. It's also teams that work together better, so the whole company benefits. So all of the people who benefit from what the company produces benefit. And yes, sometimes that's just the stakeholders, the shareholders making more money, but often that's the people who receive the product that is now more innovative and more user-friendly and is available faster, whatever. So in an organizational context, coaching is important, maybe for different reasons than it is in a family or, a family context or group of friends. So, but on a group level, it has a lot of impact, right? So individual impact, group impact, and then it has a collective impact on planetary health, for example. If more people are being more conscious about the consequences of what they do and don't do, and they realize how they are more connected, interconnected as a web of nested systems, that when I do something, it's not just me who's being affected. It's not just my immediate people surrounding me that are affected, but the whole planet is affected, sometimes in profound ways. And if people create that kind of awareness, then on a societal level, on a planetary level, coaching makes an impact. And I've always found that so meaningful. That's why I've leaned into working with coaches and supervising and training and hanging out with a lot of coaches, spending a lot of time with other coaches, helping them be better coaches. I so value my existential leadership work. You can work with one person that affects a lot of other people. When you work with a coach, they work with tons of other leaders. They work with tons of other parents. They work with so many people in positions of great responsibility. And that generative impact, when you work with someone and they work with so many other people that then have this positive impact in their world and in their groups, it's super, super meaningful. So why is coaching important? Well, I had quite a bit of a rant here, but you're contributing to a positive force in the world by helping people be more aware and attuned to themselves and attuned to other people. And that just has so much impact. Yes, there are other professions that are more important. Yeah, of course. But we're doing really important work, it feels. It's far removed from just keeping a cog in a small machine going that kind of creates value in isolation. Coaching never creates value in isolation, even if we don't always see what the value is beyond our conversations with this person.
Man, yeah, it's really good to hear you say all of that. I found that a really helpful reminder of things that deep down I feel and I know, and I completely stand behind and agree with at every level of the individual, the group, and the societal. I think what happened for me there, it became a bit maybe more clear, my own dilemma within that. I guess, I keep coming back to this time before. I have a different therapist now, but I was working with a therapist and a coach side by side. And it's interesting because all the things you were describing, the changes that come from coaching and the things people gain at the various different levels, they're all things that in my head, I'm I could imagine people can gain those from therapy too. And yet I'm aware that, therapy and coaching are quintessentially different. And I would say at that time, when I had them side by side, I always felt quite disappointed because I felt like the coaching was the one doing all the big work. And yet I don't think my coach can do the same work at some level as a therapist can. And I would say my current therapist does. So it's interesting. I wonder, if in different ways you can ultimately arrive still at the same result, but there's maybe something about coaching that's more direct. And maybe it's even a personal preference that, I sometimes miss in my current therapy, as good as it is. I always want to walk away with well, what should I do now? What's the plan? What's the goal? Or I start my sessions with, okay, what are we talking about today? And I feel like therapy doesn't appreciate that. And yet at some other level, it does still have a big impact. So I don't know, it's something about the relationship between those two.
I get what you mean, right? And it has to do with coaching isn't one thing and therapy isn't one thing. And I'm probably a bit biased, right? Because the way I've learned to coach was through existential coaching. It was, even if we studied all the other coaching approaches and methodologies, was always through an existential lens, right? So a couple of years I've trained, and many coaches learn coaching within a couple of weekends, and then they have the basic skill, and that's a very different kind of coaching when you trained in the grow model and to guide someone through a process where they can perform better, maybe work on how they think, and in a very structured way. It's a different approach to that, holding space for someone and inquiring phenomenologically and having an eye and presence with relational dynamics. And, if you have a systemic lens on your practice, you're going to work with someone very differently than when you have a behavioral grow model lens on the practice. So I think the way I talk about coaching already has a lot of these elements from therapy. That's why they sound similar to you.
Right.
And many coaching approaches do lean into that, but also it's somewhat advanced coaching. So the kind of coaching that is really focused on, okay, let's create a smart goal for each of these sessions. Let's create a situation where we can know and measure and know when we achieved something. Figure out the action plan. That's very pragmatic. It's quite transactional. And sometimes that's enough to create a smaller change. Sometimes it's enough to create a bigger change. Sometimes you just need to get things going and then other things happen. But sometimes there's real obstacles in the way, that are bigger and more complex than what coaching methodologies at that level can open up. That's why some coaches feel stuck, and then things are better placed in therapy because therapists have access to methods of deeper inquiry. And that's why it often takes longer. So it really depends what we're talking about. And that's why I think this coaching element is often seen as this more transactional, more forward-thinking, more future-oriented way of working. And some therapists bring that, absolutely. Many therapists would help you to, okay, so how do we put this into action now? That's part of their work. And some don't, right? So I think the structure can be really helpful, but the structure can also really be in the way. It just goes to show that there isn't a one size fits all approach to helping people. And I think a well-rounded practitioner will draw on some elements of therapy. Many coaches do. Many therapists will draw on elements of coaching. So I'm flying the flag for integrative practice. It takes a long time to be able to draw on all these elements. I think every coach, every practitioner, every therapist, they need to learn and acknowledge what is my lane, what is my territory, where's my frame of practice. I often, in this playing field of coaching and therapy, of working with people, Heron's different facilitation styles, if you wanted to look into that. Dehan created a map of coaching and what the coach has access to, right? Some are more challenging, some are more suggestive, some are more supportive, some are more exploring. But you can move all over this map. So I think it's important that we frame our space in this helping by talking continuum and spectrum. And then we say, well, here's where I operate. Here's what I can do. And over time, we're going to add more skills to our repertoire, more ways of being. The longer we coach or, practice therapy, the more we're going to have in our bag. The more experience we have, the more access we have to different modalities, different psychological lenses. And then we can become a more and more rounded practitioner and more integrative. But we need to know, how far can I go as a practitioner? How far can I lean into this gray area between coaching and therapy that doesn't have clear lines, really? And that's a question often for supervision. Every coach needs to ask themselves, okay, so how far can I go? How far do I want to go with a client? How deep can I go? And am I competent of going? How deep am I willing to go? Some people, they don't want to go at that kind of emotional depth. Some coaches are very uncomfortable with a client crying. Many coaches know that's now we're getting to something really important here. And they're willing and able to hold that kind of emotional depth. At which point is it important that we call it something different and we regulate. Like now, it's actually really vulnerable, sensitive, risky territory to poke more and challenge more. This client is now at risk of emotional harm if you were to really go in there and poke in their wounds. You need to know some things about ethical practice and code of conduct and maybe how to work with that kind of, and trauma emerges. Then it's important that this is no longer coaching. It's important we draw some lines. I wish every practitioner would have the ethical sensibility and a supervisor to help them to figure out, is this still okay for me to work with? And we're still asking why is coaching important, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it depends on the modality, and it depends on each practitioner and each client and what they bring in and what they want to work on. Why is it important to the client?
Yeah, man. No, that's really helpful. I think, yeah, that's helped me, acknowledge again. I think, what we almost said already in the previous session, you already said at the beginning of this session too, like coaching isn't just one thing. It has so many nuances, and it really depends where you lean into. And I think that's to do with your comfort zone, your expertise. And yeah, like you said, what kind of coach you want to be. So that's really helpful.
So what's shifted for you, if anything, when you're asking that question? Because that was a personal question, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think both the questions together for me right now, it's like I said in the previous episode, I'm kind of, leaning back into coaching more now gradually, but still kind of acknowledging that even though a lot of time has gone by and conversations have been had continually and lots of reading and other things, and no doubt also my skill set has expanded through surf coaching, which actually has a lot of overlap, I find, with life coaching. But it suddenly feels quite vulnerable. And I feel like I'm stepping backwards in time, recommitting and relaunching into the coaching. And I think, yeah, I'm kind of needing to rebuild my confidence and my belief in it. Like I said, the previous question was around stigma. And that's something I battle with as I now try and make a more long-term choice career-wise. But I think both of the questions and what you've shared with me today has been really, really helpful and really, really powerful for me, just to give me that confidence and belief in our work. Not that I don't believe in it, but I just, needed that reassurance maybe. So thank you.
I want to share one more thing with you before we go. Like yesterday, a supervisee talked about silence and that she really struggled with holding silences. And somehow the wave metaphor came up. And I know you love waves, right? So
yeah, big time.
What I realized when I tuned into the wave metaphor from that kind of perspective of silence is that when are waves silent? Because waves are crashing, they're loud, right? They can be quite violent, right? But there's a moment when they sweep out onto the beach, and then there's a moment where it's silent, and then they kind of retreat, and they get sucked back into the ocean before the next one comes crashing, right? And when I think about what you've just described in your coaching journey, coaches, they kind of crash on the beach, and then they do all this powerful stuff. But then there's moments or periods of time when we retract, and it seems like we're going back into the ocean. Sometimes it seems like it stops and we've retreated, but then the next coaching wave comes, right? And it sounds like you've spent some time just focusing on other things, being more calm on the coaching front, and even the coaching may have retreated and working with less clients, but we're gathering strength and stuff is happening back in the ocean. And so looking forward to the next wave that's coming out of it.
If you talk to me about waves in coaching, you give me goosebumps. So yeah, no, thank you. I just felt
boop bumps.
Boop bumps. What am I thinking? No, but that was beautiful. That totally makes sense as well. I love that. Yeah, that's what it feels like. Yeah, I identify with that. Cool, man. Awesome. Oh, thank you so much. That was great.
If you're listening to this, tell us about all the ways that you think coaching is important at any of these 3 levels. Or maybe there's other levels that we've missed. I would love to hear how coaches out there value coaching and at what levels. Cool. Nicki.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be with you. See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for being with us today. I appreciate your commitment to learning and growing as a coach. Just a few things before you go. First of all, we're doing this for you. So if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, do send us a question. Secondly, we're not doing this for profit, so we rely on your support to help us reach as many coaches as we can. So if you can send this episode to a friend or tell a fellow coach about what we're doing here, maybe you can subscribe or leave us a review or even support us on Patreon. That would be amazing. And lastly, you can find us across all major platforms. So whether you like to watch or you like to listen or you like to download episodes and listen to it in your car while you're driving through somewhere with no internet, you can do so too. And that's it from us. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.